Hey everyone, so I just wanted to jump on because we've got a great card happening this Saturday. Now it's over in Saudi. I think it's part of Riyadh season, and what's most exciting about this card is it's free, which is pretty rare for a card like this. It's such a good card. If you're really into your boxing, it's a good one because it's got a fantastic undercard. And what I'm most looking forward to is the main fight. It's a unification fight between Chris Billam-Smith and Gilberto Ramirez, two really, really amazing cruiserweights. Now, what I love about this fight, obviously, is not just that each man's getting the chance to unify, but also the winner is probably going to go on to fight Jai Opetaia. Now, that fight will end up possibly one of the fights of the year next year. So, what I want to do is go over each boxer individually, because if you're from the UK, you might not be that. You might not know Ramirez very well, and likely if you're from the US, you might not know Chris Billam-Smith very well. So I wanted to go over each one individually a little bit, but also I'm going to talk about what I think could happen in this fight and how it might play out. Now, a little bit about Ramirez. He's a Mexican fighter, really great cruiserweight. What I like about him is he's just as happy to fight on the front foot as he is on the back foot. Not many fighters are willing to do that. Most fighters have a preference. They like to fight on the back foot, they like to fight on the front foot, but not Ramirez. Happy to go forward, happy to go backwards, depending on who he's got in front of him. He also picks his shots really well. Now, what I mean when I say that is he gets a good look at his opponent, keeps him where he wants him by using his feet, and picks the best shots for the right moment. Sounds obvious. It sounds like all boxers would do that, but it's not as easy as it sounds, like most things with boxing. Yeah, so great shot selection. Sorry, he goes from head to body, body to head, pops out that jab to keeps his opponent where he wants him, and great back uppercut, great left uppercut. I think that's actually probably his best shot. Catches a lot of his opponents with that shot. Now, on to Chris Billam-Smith. This guy really, you know what I'm going to say? I think possibly one of the most underrated world champions in boxing right now. And I think he's underrated because a lot of what he does is very, very subtle, nothing too flashy. And so I'm going to go over a few of the things that I think make him really, really bloody good. His pace, the pace he can keep. Now, for a cruiserweight, he has a ridiculously high pace. And I've spoken to a few people in his camp, and what you'll see with Chris is he has a few sparring partners going in and out of the ring, maybe doing 3 or 4 rounds at a time. They'll leave the ring knackered, and he keeps going for however many rounds. He can keep that pace. He can stay in that red zone for the whole fight, and that, like I said, is a massive. It's a massive positive for any fighter, but for a cruiserweight, it's huge because most cruiserweights can't do that. He can not only stay there, but he's happy there. He wants to keep that pace there, and I think that's going to be big in this fight. Now, another thing about Chris is he is really good at nullifying his opponent's strengths. He just stops them from doing what they want to do, and I think a lot of that comes down to how his subtle movements. Like I said, nothing Chris does is massively flashy, but with his subtle movements, he manages to shut down his opponents. You saw it with Riakporhe. You saw it with Okolie. They couldn't get off their game plan. They couldn't get off what they wanted to do. Another one of his strengths is he's got amazing chin. I just mentioned their Riakporhe and Okolie. Massive punches. Huge punches. And we saw they didn't really bother Chris too much with their power. So I don't think we're going to see anyone really bother him that much with their power. He's got a great chin. Also, another thing, and again, another reason why I think he's underrated is because people don't think about this too much, but also he's really phenomenal at sticking to a game plan. He goes in with a really good game plan. He's a smart fighter. And he sticks to it, even when it's not going his way, or it looks like maybe it might not go his way in the early part of the fight. He sticks to that game plan, and it comes off. He pulls it off, comes to fruition even. And I think that's, again, going to play a massive part in this fight. So they've both got their attributes. With Ramirez, good footwork, good shot selection. He's pretty slick. With Chris Billam-Smith, he's subtle. He can nullify his opponent. He's got great tempo, great pace. Now, I wanted to talk about what I think could happen in this fight. Ultimately, this is going to come down to one thing. I really believe it's going to come down to who can implement their game plan the best. And for the following reasons, I think that's going to be Chris Billam-Smith. Now, if you look back at their career so far, Ramirez won his title in his last fight. So this is going to be his first defense of that cruiserweight title. Now, his last fight was also his first fight at cruiserweight, whereas Chris has spent his whole career, so that's, I mean, I don't know, it's got to be about 10 years, maybe more, at cruiserweight. That's a huge deal, huge deal. Ramirez is used to going into his fights with quite a big size advantage over his opponents, whereas that's not going to happen with Chris. If anything, Chris is going to be the bigger man. Chris is going to be the stronger man. In fact, I don't see how, considering Chris has spent his whole career at cruiserweight, how he's not going to go in there and be the bigger man. And I think he's going to look to basically manhandle Ramirez. And if you look back at Ramirez's last two fights, although he's looked great in those last two fights, don't get me wrong, the last time out when he won the world title and the time before that against Joe Smith, those two opponents, those two fighters did have success in those fights when they managed to manhandle Ramirez. So I think Chris is going to look to do that a lot more than anyone else has in Ramirez's past fights. Now, we don't know how Ramirez is going to react when it gets to the trenches, because ultimately he's never been in there with anyone like Chris Billam-Smith. However, I think we've seen that Chris has got that world level grit. No one's going to outwork him. No one's going to kind of pull him into those trenches and make him quit. It's just not going to happen. Whereas with Ramirez, we don't know that. We're going to see him tested with Chris. Chris is going to test him. I have no doubt about that. Let me think. A few other things. I did write some bits down. Now, something else I did want to touch on was the fact that the Americans seem to really be counting Chris out, which I've got to say I'm not surprised at, because we've done it in the past. A lot of people going into Chris's fights, they've kind of said, oh, his opponents are just going to outbox him, blah, 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 blah. And it just hasn't happened. Chris hasn't let it happen. And I think, again, that's what we're going to see. Malik Scott, who is Ramirez's trainer, or one of Ramirez's trainers, I think actually was quite disrespectful with one of his comments. I can't remember exactly what he said, but something about Chris not being in the same class as Ramirez, which is just, to be honest, in my opinion, rubbish. I think to understand why Chris is so good, you've also got to understand that not all great boxing is flashy and pretty. Some great boxing is subtle, and even some great boxing is even ugly. And I think you need to understand that. Another thing with Chris that I think you need to understand is this guy is Mr. 1%. And what I mean when I say he's Mr. 1% is he's juicing every last inch of everything out of everything. His training, his rehab, physiotherapy, nutrition, sleep, recovery. This man's on it, and he's making sure he is maximizing every single day of his career. So when he steps in that ring, we are seeing the best version of him. So yeah, ultimately, I've really gone around the park there. Is that the word? No, it's not. But I've gone the long way around there. Ultimately, I think that's what we're going to see. It's all going to come down to who can pull off their game plan the best. I think it's going to be Chris. I think he's going to outmuscle Ramirez. I think he's going to manhandle him. I think he's going to pull him into the trenches. I think, you know what, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think we could even see moments where Ramirez really questions whether he wants to be in there. Chris Billam-Smith is phenomenal at generating power with not a lot of space, doing that in the pocket. And yeah, I think we're in for an entertaining night of boxing. Now, like I said, it's completely free. Get on DAZN. I'm going to put a link somewhere, whether it will be in the bio, not whether it will be in my bio or the description or somewhere. I'm going to put the link there. Click on it. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Completely free. That's pretty rare these days. So yeah, enjoy a fantastic night of boxing.